Hi everyone, it's Simon from Higher Plane Games, bringing you 8 RPGs that I've been playing as part of Steam Next Fest February 2023. I enjoyed playing all of the 8 games that I'm going to showcase here, and all 8 are staying on my wish list, but they do RPG very differently. So hopefully you might find something you like in these games. And let's kick off with Darkest Dungeon 2, which was one of the most intriguing ones that I wanted to dive into, because it's taking risks on a very tried and tested formula that worked so well on the original. And I'm not sure this is better, but it's different, is probably what I would say. Instead of marching through with your party, going through dungeons and different events very quickly and succinctly moving through dungeons, in this game you've got a chariot with your flame of hope on, marching through different regions. And so you'll be driving your chariot through to different events as you go. Some will have battles, some will be like moral choices, and everything that you do has a consequence for your party, because a lot of what happened in Darkest Dungeon 1 carries over to 2. So you've got things like stress building up in the background, which then like starts to give you permanent status ailments to your characters. Or you've got a very tiny inventory, which started to get on my nerves very, very quickly in this game. And you've also got, like when you get into parties, each of your characters has melee and ranged attacks, or maybe something to do with magic, and they're all on cooldown, things like that. And so what you're doing is working out your party's position and where best to put them so that they can then have a range of attacks that work for all of the different battles that you're facing. The key here, though, is that with this chariot of hope marching through all of the different events, what was a succinct experience that you could like quite viscerally move from event to battle very seamlessly, it's now elongated and drawn out, and I don't think this is a better experience. It's different, and if I hadn't have played the first one and very much enjoyed it, I might be more positive about this change. But it feels like it's stretching things thinly, and instead of having like a couple of moves and then all of a sudden you're into something, there's like periods of 30-45 seconds of just moving forward through a stylized graphical road rash style, or Chase HQ but with chariots on, like road that just tosses around, and there's very little that you do in any of that. And so it just kind of feels like it's spreading itself thinner. And I've not really looked at the marketing of any of that, but if it's then going, we can give you millions of hours of experience, well, that might be the reason why, because you've got big empty passages between each event as you're going on. The other thing that really I struggled with this game is understanding its UI. I found it not very intuitive whatsoever, and what I thought I was choosing for some things then would have totally different effects elsewhere, and it doesn't make it clear what it's doing, and it needs some big work going on, particularly when you're making decisions and choices and moving things about in your inventory. It doesn't feel very polished yet. That said, once you hit the battles, all of that battle system works superbly. It really does still shine, and that Darkest Dungeon way of using melee and ranged attacks and all of your different abilities and switching things around and pulling enemies forward and backwards so that you can then change your attacks on them and all of that kind of stuff. It's all here present and correct and working really well. It's the bit outside of the battles that they've changed everything about it, and it doesn't feel quite as good as what I'd hoped. It's staying on my wish list though, so I'm still intrigued. The next game on this list is called Shattered Heaven, and originally I had this in my tactics video, but moved it across to RPG because it's a deck building RPG game that feels way more RPG than any other deck builder that I've been playing in recent, probably the last 18 months or so. You control 3 different characters, and they each have their own deck of cards, which you then use in battles that are turn-based to progress down various different dungeons. That reminded me a little bit of Made in Abyss, because you're kind of going into like this dark underworld with different like layers on, trying to basically become, I think, human sacrifices for atoning for a war and a blight and something that's been going on that needs to be atoned for every 10 years. Reminding me a little bit of Final Fantasy X and sacrificing Yuna. Anyway, The story plays out quite nicely, and I was genuinely quite interested and intrigued, and a lot of that is to do with the characterisation of the three people you control. One's ditzy and has lived under a rock, so is great for exposition, but the other two, one's hugely aggressive and the other one's constantly apologising for the other one's aggression, so they just work well as a trio. When it gets into battle, though, this is also where the game truly shines, because you've got individual decks built for each character, and each character has a very defined position and requirement that they fulfill when it comes into battle. So you've got one who's very tanky, one who's quick on the melee attacks, and then the third one kind of acts as two characters in one, because she has her own attacks that she can use and kind of works well as a healer standing at the back trying to do all the buffing and stuff. But if you need her to get more hands on, one of her cards summons in an additional godlike being that she then controls, and then you can dish out some big damage as well. And so being able to flick between that and have that third character operate two different functions is key to getting good wins and good successes, and it flows really nicely. I also like the fact that your deck building constantly changes throughout each battle, because you're constantly unlocking new cards, putting them into your deck, and you get to choose whose deck the cards that you win go into. So if you want to have very clearly defined characters, you can go down that, but you can almost go for 3 balanced characters if you want to as well, and start to merge it all together. So it's entirely up to you. Alongside moving around all of these different dungeons, you've also got crafting systems where you collect recipes in dungeons and then use those to create new potions, weapons, amulets and kind of buffs and all of that kind of stuff. And then there's an overarching skills improvement tree that's going on for every time you dive into a new dungeon again. So there's plenty of layers of improvement and building of characters as you go along. And it just comes together to create a really, really interesting RPG. And if you love deck builders and RPGs, this could be a chef's kiss one for you. The next game on this list is called Sons of Valhalla, and it's a side-scrolling 2D RPG with base building strategy at the heart of the game itself. You control this Viking who has died and has been sent down to complete a mission, and the gods have given you a little mini army for you to control. This starts off with you building out your base. So you might need a fishing hut to start catching fish for food so that you can then feed your troops. Then you'll get a barracks so that you can actually train your troops to become archers. To become swordsmen. Then you'll have an archery range to build out archers. And not only are the buildings upgradable, but so are all the attributes of the things that they produce. So when you've got archers, it will be their HP, their damage, but also their range or something like that you can upgrade. With the swordsmen, it's their defense, attack, and HP. But you also get several different versions of the people that you create for your army as well. But because your army has a limit to the amount of people that you can hold, those better armies, so you can have someone with a sword or someone with a sword and shield so that they can actually defend themselves and not just get slaughtered, then they'll take up 2 spaces against a basic bitches 1, for want of a better phrase to explain it. The real key to why Sons of Valhalla was working for me is as a constant drip feed of I'm just a few seconds away from an upgrade somewhere, or the battle is constantly in motion, because whilst you're building up your base, so is the enemy, and then they'll have all different waypoints that you'll be trying to siege your way through, and no sooner have you captured something, you're going to have to run back to base and start creating more army, and there's a time lag. And so if your enemy already knows that you've been defeated, or you're leaving something open like a gaping wound, those armies will come steaming in and they'll retake back the flag and they'll take back that waypoint. And so there is very much an RTS element to this game as well, but it is all RPG for me, just with nuances of that coming through. I found this very Moorish. I did struggle slightly with the controls, but I got better at it obviously over time, and it was mainly because I struggled with this when I was trying to do keyboard and mouse, and when I flipped to controller, the game played much better for me. So yeah, I'd probably recommend going controller in for this one, and remembering to dodge, because I kept forgetting. And because you die constantly in this game, you've got these runes that you equip to your belt, which are like power-ups to make your character better as you go through the game. And whenever you die, you have to trade one of those back in and lose them forever. And so it doesn't matter so much if you die, you will kind of come back again. You just lose a little bit of what made you good first time around. So you've always got to be a bit cautious. But yeah, very much enjoyed this one. Staying on my wish list. Good fun. The next game in this list is called Dungeon Drafters, and I really enjoyed this game, and I'd probably describe it as a tactical RPG for people who don't have half an hour to play a single battle. This is a quick fire and fast dungeon crawling tactical RPG. So every battle is a tiny room, barely bigger than your screen. As you move through the different dungeons, you have 3 moves that you can take on your turn before it moves to all of the enemies moving. And so you can either move 3 spaces, or move 2 and make a move, or move 1 and do 2 moves. Depends what it is that you're up to and what you're trying to do. But it's very succinct, and you can only choose from the couple of magical cards that you're given for that specific turn. Because, oh yes, deck building's in. Deck building wasn't something that I dived into particularly on this demo, but it was implied because I was collecting cards for my starter deck as I was going along. So I thought, okay, there's plenty to do with this in the future as well. Now, what I really liked about the tactics of this game is that there are quite a few interesting ways of how you could kill your enemies, and there seemed to be a lot to do with shoving and looking at the statuses of when an enemy is about to die or does die, so that you can push them into different places. So that, there was this exploding beetle that would self-destruct when it was going to die, but it does that with a sphere of death around it. So I was quite often doing a move that would push it back into an enemy, thus hurting it and the enemy, because that gave them damage too. And then the beetle would self-explode and take out the other person behind it. And I was like, yes! And that was infinitely satisfying to do, because it becomes almost like a little mini puzzle in a way, which I was enjoying. The other thing that I would say is that there was another enemy where you couldn't do the same move to it twice. So you had to think of different ways to damage it, to kill it. And that involved, because all of the different cards have different areas of attack, or they might be like diagonal lines or straight lines, whatever it is that you're doing, horizontal, vertical. You kind of have to constantly maneuver yourself into a position and then trigger something to make sure that you kill it. Otherwise, it just restores all of its health back. And it was all of that kind of thinking and planning in a very succinct, tiny battle as you was moving from room to room to room to room. It just kept a real nice pace and flow that I really enjoyed. So yeah, pleasantly surprised by this one. Came away a little happy bunny. The next game on this list is the closest to a JRPG that we're getting, and it's called Witchspring R, and I very much enjoyed this. It felt a little bit like the Atelier series and the Hyper Neptunia series had a love child, but that doesn't really describe what you're doing in the game nearly as much. It was more the vibe of what it's going for. Because you play as this witch who's desperately looking for pie. So you've got all of this crafting and witch's brew style stuff that's going on. But then also at the same time, you've got this comedic, I just want to stuff my face going on. And that's why I'm kind of saying the Atelier and Hyper Neptunia series kind of combining. Outside of that though, there's an awful lot of collecting of ingredients that you have to do in the kind of battle maps, and they are on a timer recharge, so you'll go around picking herbs and all that kind of stuff. But you can also sneak up on rabbits and then get out your archer's bow, and it turns into a mini game where you've got to bow and arrow a rabbit and kill it to get some meat for your potions. And I was like, Jesus Christ. So that was good fun, but those mini games extend to everything. So, when it comes to levelling up your character and beefing up her stats, she can go training for several times a day, and you choose the different things that you want to focus on to improve maybe your HP, your magic skills, your damage, your agility, that kind of stuff. And what you're doing then is going through mini games of like jumping the hurdles, or there's a rhythm action game where you're reading, and it was trying to gamify the levelling up system, which I really quite enjoyed. There is the option to totally skip all of that, but it made a nice change of pace because like you only do it for a minute or so, and then you've levelled up your stats juicy enough to then go out and fight the next few battles. And so it takes away this whole kind of grind for level up, because it's done on a day-night cycle. So you can train 4 times a day, or up to 4 times a day, I think the game was saying. And then you can't train until you go to sleep, which normally then pushes the story on a bit, unless you're trying to grind for ingredients to make more potions. So yeah, there was loads in there. There was allusions to things like pets coming along later on down the line as well. And it felt wholesome and very traditional in terms of its turn-based combat. Although I did like the fact that there were different ways how if you combine magic and physical attacks, it tricks you into like extra rounds that you can then get in like secret stuff. And if an enemy misses an attack, then you automatically go for a counter back again. So there's quite a lot around I'll make that character blind, which I think will come in quite handy in this game. But it played really, really well. And so yeah, Witchspring R, a definite surprise. The next game on this list is called Inkbound, which really, really scratched an itch until I realised something later on down the line, which I'll come to in a bit. But it's a turn-based RPG, heavy on tactics, heavy on the roguelike, but can also be played in 4-player co-op, which is great. But I spent all of my time in single-player mode, having a whale of a time, trying to get through various different runs, picking different classes as I went. The beauty of this is that each class starts off with its own unique kind of skills, and you'll have 3 to start with, and they'll need a cooldown. And as you move into a battle, the battle takes place in like a circular arena, and so you have free range to kind of move around and position yourself to a degree, and then it's deciding what moves you're going to trigger in what order to then try and place yourself hopefully out of harm's way, or as out of harm's way as possible from the attacks that are then going to come back at you when it comes to the enemy's turn. I found this game to be really quite easy to pick up and understand, but there's lots of heavy nuance in the background, because as you go through your run in this RPG, you are levelling up your character as you go, but you're also unlocking additional buffs that go on in the background, and also additional skills that you can then use to attack. And they can be upgraded and beefed up as well. And there's a few other kind of bits of currency kicking around as well, as you pick up quills that you can then use to upgrade your characters and all of that kind of stuff. This, I felt, was a fantastic game until I realised it requires an internet connection and it's online only, which has really turned me off the entire experience. And like, this game, I think, will find a little niche audience, but it's going to live and die on when the servers get turned off. And so I'm not prepared to get invested in it until I see that there is an offline mode added. And so whilst Inkbound is staying on my wish list, I will only ever purchase it if it's got an offline mode, because this game is made for local multiplayer as well as online, and it should not cut its own face off by going we're online only. And it just really frustrates me. This could be a great experience, but Jesus Christ, I'm not going to buy it whilst it's like that. The next game on this list is probably my biggest, most pleasant surprise, and the game that I would implore people, if you've not heard of it, take a look. It's called Wandering Sword, and it is a beautiful Chinese martial art tactical RPG. The beauty of this is that it feels both old and nostalgic and fresh and new at the same time, and that transports across everything. So I love the visual art style of this because it's pixel art, but you're kind of moving through layers, and it's got this beautiful like Gaussian blur where it's like a camera that's focusing in, so it feels nostalgic and wholesome and pretty and beautiful. The soundtrack to this game is like quintessential late 90s, early 2000s classic RPG. This soundtrack, I had the menu music and like stuff like that on just playing whilst I was grabbing myself a drink and pause. Yes. We'll be loving and buying the soundtrack. But also when it comes to the actual battles as well, it's like you're in a very small tactical grid, moving around and then kicking off a couple of actions before it then moves to the next turn as you go. And the way how you upgrade your character, there's loads of different ways of doing it. Each character has chi, just like Chinese medical philosophy. And there's 5 different like mini maps, and they've all got different acupressures on. And so when you go to upgrade, you're basically upgrading your acupressure points to then heighten your awareness and make your character better. And I really liked that kind of concept and idea, and seeing it not only bear out in the menus and the kind of nodes that you're unlocking, but also your character is poisoned at the beginning of the game and is trying to fight off the poison to stop them from dying. So they have to like meditate, and you get these beautiful points where like it's going from day to night and back to day again, and you're meditating, and there's like really sumptuous ancient music going on in the background, and I'm like, yes, give me this, inject it into my veins. I just had a giant grin on my face throughout. The other cool thing around this as well is that you can befriend characters, and once you hit an affinity level, they can then enter your party, or you can invite them to join, which I think gives you an awful lot of variety in the types of characters and parties that you're going to build out, and the stories that you'll make with them across the full game. You also have the ability in the full game, I believe, to choose between turn-based and real-time. So if you have a preference, one or the other, you can have both in this game, which I think is superb as well. Personally, with these types of games, particularly where it's tactical, I prefer turn-based. I'm a slow snails player, me. But it's great to have the option of both. And I love the aesthetic, the art style, the story, the chi, the music. This has got me very, very excited. So this is the Smithy recommendation in this video. Check this one out, Wandering Sword. The final game on this list is a game that is probably the most unique and interesting in terms of, ooh, what are you doing? But probably needs a fair bit of polish when it hits early access, I believe, at the end of this month. The game's called Dreadful River, and the idea is that you're on a king in exile escaping your like ruined lands in your realm, and you're floating in a raft down the river with just a few like of your army left. So you've got a couple of people with some spears, some people with some arrows, and then like someone steering the raft as you go around. And so you float down the river, controlling and sailing your way around. But as it's constantly grinding and procedurally generated as you kind of wander around, I believe is how it was kind of pulling it all together for the runs that I was doing. There's loads of enemies on the river, but also in the river banks as well. And so what you're doing is mooring up your raft at different locations, disembarking, and then trying to explore some of the river banks, killing and taking over some of the like fireplaces as you go, or docking and dropping anchor next to merchants and upgrading your equipment, and then buying in loads of resources so that you can create more arrows for your archers, or upgrading some of the sturdiness of your raft as you go down the river. I found this game to be a little bit chaotic in terms of how you can steer around on the raft, and I was getting like stuck in locations, and I was finding that sometimes events just wouldn't trigger for me, and I'd have to kind of raft back away and come back again, as if parking next to something, it wasn't recognising what I was doing, but it was preempting me doing something when I was getting closer to it, but then would kind of like stop me if I didn't drop anchor too early, or early enough, if that makes sense. And so I was getting a little bit frustrated as I was moving around. And I did find some of the controls on aiming for stuff to try and get an early advantage over my competitors was a bit weird. When it asks you to aim something, it's a 360-degree aim that spins round your raft, and I thought I could just like change the camera angle and point it in a certain direction, but nope, you've got to kind of roll the mouse around to try and get it in the right location. So there's some control stuff and some like collision detection that needs to be sorted with this game. But the concept I thought was really interesting and sound. And it's one of those things, give an endless river in front of you and you want to see what's at the other side, particularly when you can see like there's a giant tower in the distance and it's slowly coming towards you, or the river forks into multiple paths and you're thinking, and then with like dynamic weather effects, and then there's thunder and lightning, and then you're picking up like scavenged goods out of the water so that you can then have some cargo. Really, really great concept. The flame in the flood. Now, it doesn't it's not quite survival-ish, if that makes sense, which is what the flame in the flood does. This definitely throws it onto an RPG and like very basic naval combat, but it has its own unique vibe, and I'm genuinely intrigued and interested, and I'll be watching its development to see if it irons out all of those kind of UI and control issues that I was having, because I think there's a decent game in here. So that is a run through of 8 RPGs that I thoroughly enjoyed my time with. Let me know if you found anything useful or interesting down in the comments. Hope these videos have been useful. If they have, please do give them a thumbs up, because YouTube never knows what to do with me, because I bounce around from genre to genre and it doesn't know how to cope. So any help helps me out. Cheers! Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.